No toothpaste, no toothbrush, no dentist, ever, for their entire life, generation after generation. And when archaeologists dig up their skulls and look inside their mouths, here's what they find: straight teeth, full sets, almost no cavities. Meanwhile, you brushed twice today, you've probably flossed at some point this month, and there's a decent chance you've still had a filling. So, what changed? And here's the part that's going to bother you for the rest of this video. It's not really about brushing at all. It's not really about hygiene. It's something much bigger, and it happened to almost every human population on Earth at almost exactly the same point in history. By the end of this, you're going to understand why your mouth is basically fighting a battle your ancestors never had to fight. Let's get into it. Let's start with what we actually know, because this isn't a guess. It's one of the most consistent findings in bioarchaeology. When researchers study skeletal remains from hunter-gatherer populations before farming shows up anywhere in their history, cavity rates are strikingly low. We're talking small single-digit percentages of teeth affected, sometimes even lower, across wildly different environments. And that's the part that makes this interesting. This isn't one lucky group in one lucky climate. Researchers have found the same pattern in hunter-gatherer remains from southern Africa, from Ice Age Europe, from the Americas, from Southeast Asia. Populations that never had contact with each other, eating completely different foods, in completely different climates. And a lot of them show the same thing: healthy, mostly cavity-free teeth. Compare that to modern populations, where dental researchers estimate the majority of adults have had at least one cavity in their lifetime. In some countries, the number is well over 90%. So somewhere between ancient hunter-gatherer and you, right now, something happened. And it happened almost everywhere, which is your first clue that this isn't about willpower or hygiene habits. It's about something structural. Your first instinct is probably, they just didn't have sugar lying around. And you're not wrong. But the full explanation goes deeper, and it's actually a story about bacteria. Cavities aren't caused by food touching your teeth. They're caused by specific bacteria in your mouth. The main one is called Streptococcus mutans, that feed on sugars and starches and produce acid as a byproduct. That acid is what eats through your enamel. No sugar, no acid. No acid, no cavity, more or less, regardless of how often you brush. Now think about what ancient humans were actually eating: wild meat, root vegetables, nuts, tough, fibrous plants. Practically no refined sugar, no refined flour, nothing that breaks down into simple sugar the moment it hits saliva. Their bacteria simply didn't have much to work with. It's not that they were disciplined about their diet. They physically couldn't eat the thing that causes cavities because it hadn't been invented yet. So brushing wasn't the missing ingredient. The fuel for the bacteria was. Here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, because you can actually watch this shift happen in the archaeological timeline, almost like flipping a switch. In some places, the moment farming shows up in a region's history, cavity rates often spike, and sometimes fast, within just a few generations. But here's the twist almost nobody mentions: it doesn't happen the same way everywhere. And which crop a population switched to turns out to matter enormously. Populations that shifted to maize-heavy diets show some of the sharpest cavity spikes in the entire archaeological record. But populations that shifted to wheat in parts of Europe and the Near East, some show barely any increase at all. Rice farming populations in parts of Asia sometimes show lower cavity rates than the foragers who came before them, not higher. Same basic transition, leaving hunting and gathering behind for farming, completely different outcome for your teeth, depending on exactly what ended up on the plate. Why? Maize breaks down into fermentable sugar in the mouth extremely efficiently. It's almost custom-built to feed cavity-causing bacteria. Wheat and rice, processed and cooked differently, don't feed that same bacterial feeding frenzy nearly as effectively. So the real story isn't farming caused cavities. It's more precise, and honestly more interesting. Whichever specific carbohydrate a population built its diet around is what decided whether their teeth held up or fell apart. Agriculture is usually taught as the thing that saved humanity: stable food, permanent settlements, the foundation of civilization. And it was in a lot of ways. But depending on which crop you happened to build your civilization on, it may have quietly introduced one of the first major health problems your specific ancestors had never had to deal with before. Now, if I stopped here, you'd walk away thinking, farming bad, hunting good. And that's actually too simple, because there are exceptions and they prove the real point even better. There are hunter-gatherer groups in the archaeological and anthropological record who did have noticeably higher cavity rates than the typical pattern. And it's not because they brushed less. It's because their specific environment gave them access to a concentrated sugar source anyway. Wild honey is the big one. Populations with reliable, heavy access to wild honey show elevated cavity rates compared to other foragers, even without a single grain of cultivated wheat in sight. The Hadza of Tanzania are the clearest example of this on record. Hadza men who live in the bush and rely heavily on wild honey have cavities on over half their teeth, worse than Hadza men who've moved to villages and eat a mostly farmed diet. Meanwhile, Hadza women in that same bush environment, eating fibrous wild tubers instead of binging on honey, have some of the healthiest teeth recorded in any population, hunter-gatherer or otherwise. Same environment, same lack of farming, same lack of toothbrushes, wildly different cavity rates, because it all comes down to what's actually being eaten, not which era or lifestyle you're labeled under. This is actually the strongest possible evidence for the theory, not a contradiction of it. It's not farmers versus hunters as some kind of tribal identity. It's concentrated sugar and starch versus not. Whenever concentrated sugar shows up, whether that's honey 10,000 years ago or candy last Tuesday, the cavity rate follows it. Here's a piece almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most interesting part of this whole story. It's not just about cavities, it's about the actual shape of the human jaw. Chewing tough, raw, fibrous food for hours a day, which is basically what ancient humans did constantly just to get enough calories, puts real mechanical stress on the jawbone while it's developing in childhood. And bone responds to stress by growing more robust. More stress on the jaw during growth generally means a wider jaw, more room for teeth to come in straight, and fewer impacted wisdom teeth. Softer, more processed modern diets require dramatically less chewing force. Less mechanical stress during childhood development is one of the leading theories, not the only one. Genetics plays a role too, for why modern jaws tend to end up smaller and more crowded, which is a big part of why orthodontics has become such a massive, almost universal industry. Examinations of ancient skulls consistently show wider jaws and far fewer impacted wisdom teeth than modern populations. Malocclusion, crowded, misaligned teeth, has been found in some hunter-gatherer remains, but it shows up far less often than it does in people today. Ancient jaws generally had the room. Modern jaws on softer food from birth often don't. So it's not just that your ancestors avoided cavities. Their entire mouth structure developed differently because of the sheer mechanical work their food demanded, a side effect of chewing that a soft modern diet simply never asks your body to do. So where does that leave us today? Because obviously nobody's suggesting you go gnaw on raw roots for the rest of your life. The honest takeaway is this: your ancestors didn't have better discipline or better dental routines than you. They had a fundamentally different food environment, low in refined sugar for most, not all of them, high in fiber, and demanding enough on the jaw to shape its development. Modern life removed almost all of those things at once, and toothbrushes and dentists are essentially the patch we invented to compensate for a problem our own food supply created. That's not a reason to feel bad about a filling. It's actually the opposite. It reframes cavities as less of a personal failure and more of a predictable outcome of the environment nearly all of us live in now. Understanding where the problem actually comes from is a very different thing than being told to just brush better. And it raises a bigger question that applies way beyond teeth. How many other things we treat as personal health failures are actually just mismatches between ancient bodies and a completely modern environment? That's a rabbit hole worth going down, and it's exactly what the rest of this channel is about. So next time someone tells you to just brush better, you'll know the real story is a lot bigger than that. If this messed with how you think about your own teeth, wait until you see what else your body's still fighting battles your ancestors never had.